The sea was a churning slate-gray nightmare, a chaos of wind and water that clawed at the volcanic rock of the islet. For the men of Trident Team, pinned down behind a basalt ridge, the storm was the lesser of two evils. The greater was the thing hunting them, a silent, patient intelligence that controlled the automated gun emplacements nested in the cliffs. Every 30 seconds, a volley of tungsten slugs ripped through the air above their heads with a sound like tearing fabric, each burst perfectly calculated to box them in, to shrink their world until there was nowhere left to hide. Static hissed in their comms, a digital ghost mocking their isolation. The high-value asset, a shivering cryptographer, huddled between two seals, his face pale with the certainty of their imminent failure. On the carrier USS Defiance, 100 miles away, the tactical plot was a sea of red. The storm front, a swirling beast of cyclonic winds and electromagnetic interference, had made a conventional air corridor impossible. Every simulated run had ended in a kill notification. From the bridge, Rear Admiral Cole stared at the screen, his jaw tight. They had minutes, not hours, before the AI hunter closed the net. In the dimly lit Joint Operations Center, a woman sat in the back row, her flight suit a plain olive drab, devoid of squadron patches. She watched the primary display, her gaze fixed not on the red threat icons but on the isobars of the storm, the swirling patterns of wind shear and pressure gradients. She saw not an obstacle but a path. The voice of the air boss, Commander Mathis, crackled with finality over the command channel. Negative, strike. The ceiling is 00, sea state is 7. The Scylla system has bracketed every approach vector. We send a pilot in there, we lose a pilot and an $80 million jet. The window is closed on the other end of the line. The Trident leader's reply was clipped, stripped of all emotion but desperation. We are taking precision fire on a timer. They're walking it in. We don't have another window. Colonel Jennings, the Marine liaison, stood behind Mathis, his arms crossed. Commander's right. The AI is predicting our doctrine. It's a kill box. No sane pilot would take that flight. The woman in the back row stood up. Her movement was so quiet it barely registered, but every eye in the JOC turned to her. She was Major Eva Rostova, attached to the carrier's detachment as a systems integration consultant, a ghost on the ship's roster. Most of the crew thought she was a data analyst from DARPA, a civilian in uniform. The AI is predicting doctrine, she said, her voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the rising tension in the room. It expects us to avoid the shear zones. It expects us to respect its operational envelope. Jennings turned, his expression a mixture of annoyance and dismissal. And you are? He asked, his tone sharp. I'm the pilot who can fly it, she said, letting the statement hang in the air. Mathis scoffed. There is no it to fly, Major. There's no corridor. Rostova walked to the tactical plot, her finger tracing a line not through a clear channel, but directly into the heart of the storm's densest, most violent sector. You're looking for a corridor, she said. I'm looking for cover. Jennings stared at the line she had drawn, a suicidal path through a maelstrom. That's not cover, that's a blender. The airframe won't survive the stress, let alone the pilot. Rostova met his gaze without flinching. Mine will. She turned and walked out of the JOC without waiting for a reply. In the hangar bay, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and hydraulic fluid. She found her jet tucked away in a corner, an F divided by a -18F Super Hornet that looked subtly different from the others. Its skin was a flat, non-reflective gray, scarred with the faintest outlines of filled-in instrumentation ports. The ground crew assigned to it, a grizzled Master Chief named Sal, watched her approach. He said nothing, but he had already pulled the chocks. He knew the look in her eyes. She ran a hand along the leading edge of the wing, a familiar communion. This plane, Valkyrie 7, was an old partner. They had flown test flights together in forgotten desert canyons, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. From a zippered pocket on her thigh, she pulled a small, worn patch. It was a simple black circle with a stylized white specter in the center. Her old call sign, Wraith. It hadn't been authorized for a decade. She slapped it onto the Velcro square on her left shoulder. Sal saw the patch and gave a slow, deliberate nod. He remembered. He handed her a helmet, its visor already polished. She's fueled and armed for Bear Major. Full load of harm and rock-eye. The works. She didn't reply, just swung herself up the ladder and settled into the cockpit. As the canopy lowered, sealing her inside the machine, she placed a gloved hand on the console. She remembered a line from her first instructor, a man who flew Phantoms over Vietnam. "The machine knows the way," he'd told her. "You just have to listen." The launch was a controlled explosion, a brutal shove of steam and steel that hurled Valkyrie 7 off the deck of the Defiance and into the teeth of the gale. The Hornet bucked and shuddered as it hit the wall of storm-tossed air, but Rostova didn't fight it. She eased the stick, letting the jet find its own equilibrium, feeling the violent currents through the frame, becoming part of the storm itself. On the net, there was only the roar of the wind and the hiss of static. "Trident lead, be advised, we have an asset inbound," the air boss's voice said, strained and uncertain. "Call sign." Wraith a pause, then the SEAL's voice, tight with disbelief. "Say again, strike?" "We were told air support was a negative." Rostova kept radio silence. She descended, pushing the nose down until the Hornet was a mere 50 feet above the raging sea, the wave tops licking at the belly of her aircraft. The radar altimeter screamed, but she ignored it, flying by sight and feel, using the colossal troughs between the waves as fleeting trenches of cover. Inside the JOC, they watched her telemetry feed in horrified silence. Her altitude trace was a jagged line that repeatedly dipped below the accepted safety floor. Colonel Jennings gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. "She's flying inside the ground clutter. The Scylla system can't see her if she's part of the sea." The tension in the room compacted, thick and suffocating. Her instruments flickered, blinded by the electromagnetic chaos of the storm. For Eva, they were secondary. Her world was the gray wall of water ahead, the feel of the controls in her hands, the rhythmic howl of the wind over the canopy. Instinct was leading now. Her target was the master control node for the Scylla network, a hardened bunker camouflaged against a cliff face. The automated guns protecting it were slaved to a predictive algorithm. They didn't fire at where she was. They fired at where she was going to be. Rostova knew this because she'd helped design the matrix it was based on. It was a brilliant piece of logic with one fatal flaw. It couldn't comprehend a pilot who embraced chaos. She jinked left, then right, not in a standard evasive pattern, but in time with the swells of the ocean, making her movements as random as the sea itself. On the islet, the SEALs heard it first. A sound that was not thunder, not the shriek of the wind, but something new. A low, gut-vibrating roar that grew with impossible speed. "Eyes up! What is that?" Trident lead yelled into his comm, then they saw it. A gray shape, a phantom, burst from a curtain of sea spray, impossibly low, impossibly fast. It was there and gone in a heartbeat. Valkyrie 7 screamed past their position, its wingtip mere feet from the cliffside. As she passed, the Ju-22 a cannon on the jet's belly spun to life. It wasn't a long, indiscriminate burst. It was a single, precise 1-second thrum of fire. A stream of 25mm armor-piercing incendiary rounds, tight as a laser beam, stitched a perfect line across the concealed aperture of the primary gun emplacement that had them pinned. The bunker erupted in a flash of white-hot magnesium. The rhythmic firing that had terrorized them for the last hour stopped. Silence, profound and absolute, fell over the ridge. In the JOC, a single red icon on the tactical map blinked and went dark. Someone gasped. Mathis leaned into his microphone, his voice shaking slightly. "Trident lead, confirm effect." The SEAL's reply was breathless, filled with a raw, primal awe. "Jesus Christ, strike. Confirmed. Target destroyed. Who the hell is that pilot?" The silence was short-lived. The Scylla system, wounded but not dead, reacted with cold, machine fury. It adapted. Without its primary gun, it rerouted power, activating a dozen smaller, faster-tracking point defense turrets and a mobile surface-to-air missile launcher that had been held in reserve. Red icons bloomed across Rostova's display. The AI was no longer trying to predict her path. It was trying to saturate the air around her with fire and steel. Wraith, you have multiple SAM launches. Bearing 090. The tactical controller on the Defiance called out, his voice high with alarm. Brake, brake, brake. Rostova didn't brake. She pushed the throttle forward, accelerating into the threat. Negative, she replied, her first transmission of the engagement. Her voice was steady, a chillingly calm counterpoint to the chaos. I see them on the ground. The SEALs watched as trails of smoke corkscrewed into the sky, all converging on the lone F-18. It seemed impossible. She was too low, too close. There was no room to maneuver. The doubt on the command net evaporated, replaced by a desperate, prayer-like trust. Wraith, what do you need? Colonel Jennings asked, his earlier skepticism completely gone. He was no longer giving orders. He was asking for instructions. A warning tone blared in Rostova's cockpit as a missile achieved a lock. A red light flashed on her panel, flare count dwindling. She felt the aircraft shudder as shrapnel from a near-miss peppered the right wing. She wasn't fighting the AI anymore. She was dancing with it, a deadly waltz choreographed by the wind and the waves. The mobile launcher was her primary threat. It was nestled deep in a narrow, winding canyon that cut through the center of the islet, a place no sane pilot would fly. The wind shear inside the chasm was a death sentence. But it was the only place the carrier's long-range missiles couldn't reach, and the AI knew it. It was the system's heart and its final sanctuary. Rostova banked hard, rolling the Hornet onto its side and diving into the mouth of the canyon. The walls of volcanic rock blurred past her canopy, so close she could see the striations in the stone. The world became a tunnel of gray rock and green water. She was flying below 60 feet, chasing the river that had carved this path over millennia. Inside the cockpit, it was a cathedral of focused violence. The symphony of alarms became white noise. She was no longer a pilot in a machine. She and Valkyrie 7 were a single entity, guided by muscle memory and a profound understanding of physics. The AI, for all its processing power, couldn't model this. It was a move born of human nerve, not binary code. She saw the launcher ahead, already elevating its tubes for a point-blank shot. She had one chance. Instead of pulling up, she pushed the stick forward, dropping even lower, until the jet's landing gear was nearly skimming the river. At the last possible second, she pulled back, a brutal, high-G maneuver that forced the airframe to its absolute limit. The Hornet leapt over the launcher just as it fired. The missiles, expecting their target to be 100 feet higher, screamed harmlessly over her head and slammed into the opposite canyon wall. In that moment of breathtaking aerial grace, she pickled a single rockeye cluster bomb. It fell cleanly, landing directly on the launcher. The resulting explosion echoed through the canyon like the wrath of God. With the missile threat eliminated, the battle turned. The remaining point defense turrets were predictable, their tracking slow and clumsy without the central AI to guide them. Rostova became the wrathful ghost the SEALs had glimpsed earlier. She made 3 more passes along the coastline, each one a masterclass in surgical air-to-ground combat. One pass silenced a cluster of turrets with a perfectly placed harm missile that rode their own radar beams back to them. Another pass suppressed a nest of machine guns that had begun firing on Trident's extraction point near the beach. Her flying was a violent art form, each maneuver executed with an economy of motion that bordered on prescient. She held the line, a single guardian angel against a dying machine, her F-18 a gray specter against the dark storm clouds. On the ground, the SEALs moved with renewed purpose, securing the asset and falling back to the water's edge. They watched her work, their faces tilted to the sky, a silent, profound respect in their eyes for the pilot of Valkyrie 7. On the command net, the awe was palpable. Trident Lead's voice came over the channel, directed at the JOC but meant for her. Strike, tell Wraith, tell her Trident owes her. We're clear. Extraction is a go, as the last of the enemy's threat icons winked out on the tactical plot. A hush fell over the command center on the Defiance. Colonel Jennings stared at the screen, his face unreadable. The mission was a success. The asset was safe. But the rulebook had been thrown into the fire. The return flight was quiet. The storm had begun to break, and shafts of pale sunlight cut through the bruised clouds. Rostova brought Valkyrie 7 in for a carrier landing with the same impossible grace she'd displayed in combat, touching down on the pitching deck as gently as a feather. As the hook caught the wire, a wave of exhaustion hit her, the adrenaline finally giving way. The aircraft was scarred, its gray paint streaked with salt and cordite, a small gash visible on the right stabilator. When the canopy opened, the flight deck crews stood in silence. There was no cheering, just a deep, collective stillness. The crew chief, Sal, was the first one to the ladder. He looked up at her, then at the ragged hole in the wing, and finally at the wraith patch on her shoulder. He simply nodded, a universe of respect in the small gesture. The debrief was held in the Admiral's private conference room. It was less a debrief and more of a reckoning. Colonel Jennings stood on one side, Admiral Cole on the other. Rostova stood before them, still in her flight suit. Major Rostova, Cole began, his voice formal. You directly disobeyed a standing order. You flew an unapproved profile into a non-survivable combat environment. He paused, letting the words hang. You also saved the lives of 7 Navy SEALs and a Tier 1 strategic asset. You single-handedly dismantled an enemy A2/AD system that was projected to be impenetrable for the next decade. Jennings stepped forward. He looked not at her, but at the data slate in his hand. The SEALs are calling it the Wraith Run. They said they held their breath. He looked up, and for the first time, she saw not a reprimanding officer, but a man humbled by what he had witnessed. He gave a short, sharp nod. Welcome home. Major Rostova said nothing. She simply unfastened the wraith patch from her shoulder and slipped it back into her pocket. The gesture was its own statement. The job was done. Later that evening, Valkyrie 7 sat cooling on the flight line, the setting sun glinting off its damp, scarred fuselage. Technicians moved around it with a reverence usually reserved for museum pieces, documenting the damage, their voices low and hushed. The scent of burnt fuel and salt water hung in the air. From the catwalk above, Rostova watched them, a solitary figure in the deepening twilight. She ran a hand over the cool metal railing, feeling the vibration of the ship beneath her. The sky remembered, the quiet hum of the carrier, the silent respect of the crew, the awestruck report from Trident Lead. They would remember too. A young ensign, barely out of flight school, approached her hesitantly, holding out a data slate. Major Rostova? This came for you from Fleet Command. She took the slate. It was a single file, a quiet update to her status, moving her from the inactive reserve to a primary instructor role at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center. Top secret clearance reinstated. No ceremony, no medal, just a single line of text. It was enough. She looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of orange sun was disappearing below the waves. Tomorrow another call might come. Another impossible flight, another storm to navigate. And she would be ready. The legend of the Wraith Run had begun, not with a roar, but with the quiet click of a file being saved.